If everyone can take out their cell phones, handhelds, personal devices, they have to be powered down. They can't be on silent, vibrate, or any other mode other than powered down. If you are speaking this evening, we ask that you please sign in, direct all comments, questions, and concerns to the board. If you do need to speak to one another, take it into the hallway. It interferes with our opportunity to hear those that are speaking. And as always, we're going to be courteous with each other with regards to time and speech and rebuttals. We're going to start this evening's meeting first with a motion to open. Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we open this meeting of the Board of Architectural Review and Historic Preservation on November 9th, 2015.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Welcome to the November 9th, 2015 meeting of the Architectural Board of Review and Historic Preservation. My name is Curtis Highsmith, and I am your chair. I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Jeff Rodlieb, Christina Redding, Brian Brady. I know there's an empty seat here, but we did not have the opportunity at our last meeting to say farewell to Esther Pastor, who has gone on, and we appreciate her time, her talent, her efforts that she's put upon this board, and her vacancy will definitely be felt, and we look forward to the next person who decides to put their hands to the plow and do some of this work. Zach Studenroth, our historic consultant, our legal counsel, Bo Robinson, Antoinette, welcome here as well. We're going to start this evening's meeting with signs and first application sign.
First application is Arias Design, storefront.
Is the applicant present? Is the applicant present? Is it just the decal on the window?
Yeah.
No awning, no front sign?
I have no issue with it. I was kind of looking for something more.
No, not at all.
Yep, just bottom of the store window. Decal has the actual swatch as well as the rendering of what it will look like. Brian? Or,
Yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
Any public comment on the application? Motion to approve?
I make a motion that we approve the application of Arias Designs on Nugent Street.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That concludes our signs. First application, historic. Closed for written decision by council. Council?
In the file is a written decision approving the gates as built. As it turns out, they have been built prior to the resolution for the written decision, but they do comply with the location and the specifications approved by the board. So in effect, this is a retroactive approval, and an affirmative vote on the motion will be to retroactively approve the construction of the gates.
Motion to approve written decision by council for Elm Hill LLC.
I make a motion that we approve the written decision by council for Elm Hill LLC.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Next application, please.
Next application is William and Scarlett Robertson, 445 Hill Street.
Good evening. My name is Doug Vaggi, Douglas R. Vaggi Architects.
Proceed.
Our firm was retained by the Robertsons, who are the owners of 445 Hill Street, to provide designs for the renovations and additions to their one-family house. 445 Hill Street is located in the historic district in an R40 zone. The proposed scope of work includes adding approximately 3,455 square feet of two-story additions to the existing house with a three-car attached garage and a 455 square foot accessory pool house. The subject property is in the tax rolls as 904-1-3-89.1. Based on the limited records we found, the date of the initial construction is prior to 1902. There's a handwritten notation that it was around 1845. The existing structure is a 2.5-story shingle-style house, partially on crawl space and partially on a cellar. The existing wood frame is on a rubble foundation with areas of concrete block repairs. Few of the architectural elements of historical significance still exist, including triangular windows, 6/6 and 6/1 window patterns, a front porch with square posts, and a front entry door with side lights. From the basement, there is wood timber, some of the original wood timber visible. There was a barn, carriage house that existed at the time the property was subdivided, which I believe was in '79. The subdivision of the structure no longer, with the subdivision, the structure no longer exists. It was demolished. The Robertsons purchased the house in 1979. In 1980, plans were filed with the building department for a one-story addition for a breakfast area, along with interior renovations to kitchen, master suite, all bath and bedrooms. A second building department filing is on record from '94 with a larger one-story family room addition off the back of the house. Exterior maintenance has taken place on the house through the years, including replacement of exterior trim, shingle, and some of the windows. Structural reinforcement has taken place under the original portion of the house. The structure under the north part of the house was constructed with later additions and is in good condition. In recent years, the Robertsons noticed areas of floor rot and mold. Our firm inspected the existing foundation and framing and found timber and interlocking wood framing exists with the first floor framing, but numerous areas of shoring in the posts and in the former posts and beams, doubled up framing, wood blocking, and shimming have been added in the basement and crawl space to resupport the first floor. There are rotted wood plates along the perimeter. Many of the joists are improperly notched and cut for plumbing and electrical lines. There are unsupported ends to some of the floor framing. There are areas of rot and mold with significant damage in the kitchen area. There's no insulation in the floor framing. Numerous electrical and plumbing lines that have been shored up. It's not possible to properly install new insulation in these areas. The front crawl space has a dirt floor with minimal clearances, which allows for significant moisture buildup and heat loss. And I have photographs of that if you'd like me to submit.
So that I understand your presentation for this afternoon, you said several things. One, that the structure itself, in your estimation, only identifies a few historical characteristics.
Correct.
Deeming it a structure which potentially within the historic district is a contributing structure. Second thing I heard in your conversation leans more towards the cost that would be incurred to try to either repair or restore the current structure, and you're saying that it's in a manner that is beyond affordable, and it would be best to demolish the structure?
Well, the thought was originally to demolish the structure,
Okay.
but we would like to try to work with it. We would like to preserve it. But in order to do that, we'd have to lift it off the foundation. We'd create a new foundation with the new additions and then try to work that existing frame back into the existing foundation.
So your application is leaning towards restoration of the existing structure?
Correct, with the additions,
Okay,
yes.
so there's not a demo, there's no request for demo, there's no...
No.
Go
sorry.
ahead, go ahead, please.
The tricky part will be it's got a front porch that exists also. We have to see how we could lift this, preserve it. We may have to do some structural work to reinforce it. But the portion of the house that was built in the 70s and 80s or 90s, we would remove and not rebuild. What we're looking to do is restore the original house and build to the east, which is parallel with Hill Street. And the reason we're looking to do that is the noise on the traffic on Hill Street has just gotten worse over the years. And we're looking to kind of create a buffer using the house between the street and the backyard.
Were you able to look at, review, and prepare yourself for the comments and a report that Zach did on the property?
We had called the building department on Friday, but we did not receive any response.
Okay, so you have not received a copy of
No.
this? All right, Zach, I know you did a report, we asked that you do so. You want to just briefly go over the, and I'll give us a copy.
Well, following your argument, but my biggest question would be, regardless of scope of work that's required to stabilize and preserve the existing structure, which is probably somewhat typical, that in no way specifically justifies the design or the placement of the new work. They're essentially two separate things. And I would suggest that if you read our guidelines carefully, you'll see that the design solution that you've come up with here does not display any familiarity with that concept. I mean, the philosophy being that of additions kind of respecting the architecture, the massing, et cetera, of the existing building and working with that so as not to render the existing building seemingly insignificant in the final scope or scheme of things. By my count, you're going up 5 feet to a new ridge line, give or take a little bit. Not to mention the 7-foot chimney that towers above that, but that's okay. So in other words, the existing house, although preserved, gets absorbed into this extremely long. I think the facade in its totality is nearly 3 times that of the existing. And that's what's facing Hill Street. I hadn't thought about the noise buffering effect of the architecture. I guess that's probably true. But the visual effect of it is really overwhelming. So it's not at all responsive to the village guidelines to not only preserve the building, but to preserve it visually, so that the sense of the building remains a historical building with additions which answer to whatever your program is. So on that basis, I don't think that this is a design that displays sensitivity to that criterion.
Well, if I could respond.
Sure.
I think we are trying to keep the consideration of that existing house. We're replacing it in the same exact location that it is now. The addition sets back from that approximately 5 feet. The porch area is still accentuated. We're only extending the porch around to the front door, the new front door location. But the rest of the house sets back more than what you see in the plan. The garage portion, with the new codes, we're trying to provide enough parking on the lot. The garage area is a 1-story, it sets back away from the main house. So you're not going to see that as straight on as you might see it in a two-dimensional elevation. We're reducing the roof lines in the front as much as we can. These are the existing roof lines. We're bringing the roof line down even on the other wing, but we are trying to get a little height so that on the back of the house, we can get roof lines that have decent angle or decent slope to them. From the street, the house really is not visible. It's all landscaped in. The whole property is actually landscaped in. And if you look at the existing house drawings, which we have toward the back of the set, what's changing is that, yes, there is more visibility of house along Hill Street, but the house right now is very long north to south. Which in any effect, I think would be more visible to the neighbors left and right of us than looking straight on from Hill Street. The length of this house, you could see, if you're comparing it, is not that much different. The house does not have any garage structure right now existing. So we have to add some structure for that. That's what's extending it out. I would say maybe the house is 50% longer along Hill Street, plus the garage part that's attached to the house.
So by my arithmetic, we're going from approximately 36 to 106.
But what I'm saying is 25 foot of that is actually garage that you're seeing on the side.
Well, but I guess we have a slightly different perspective. you know, preservation zoning this is zoning. This has to do with what is in the public way. The view to the side facade as it presently exists and as it was enlarged historically is of secondary nature as far as the code's concerned. The code is addressing what is visible from the public way. I would subtract hedges from that equation because hedges grow, they die, they go out in and out of fashion, etc. It's a bush, it's not a building. The building, hopefully, as built, will stand for a good long time. And it will present 103 feet of facade to Hill Street. That is the public way. And I'm simply saying that it's true that you are preserving this existing section of the old house, but by making it a secondary wing, a facade gable that projects out from the main massing of the new house, which rises up 5 feet to a long new ridgeline, and by shifting the front door from this traditional house type to a new front element in which the old house is balanced with another new wing, doesn't strike me as a careful understanding of what the guidelines are here, which is to preserve the old house and to make the additions subservient to it, which indeed is what the back additions to the existing house do. They may have grown over time, they may not be all that aesthetically pleasing because they have different roof lines, they are what they are. That's how the house was enlarged. So that would be the recommendation, I think, according to guidelines, to do it that way.
Well, again,
And of
the owners
course-
are looking, the owners have lived here for 27 years.
Okay.
And over those 27 years, the traffic along Hill Street's become unbearable. They want to live in the neighborhood, they want to stay at this property, and they're looking for a way to limit the traffic that's coming down Hill Street. Right now, you're right, the building goes lengthwise. But if you stand in that yard, all you hear are the trucks and cars going by. That's why we
I'm only
turned,
addressing the architecture. I can't imagine that living on Hill Street could be considered unbearable.
if you speak to the Robertsons, that's why we're here today.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
that's,
you have to understand, we understand the use and the purpose of the design that you've created. And that aside, the responsibility of this board is the aesthetics. So, and we say this constantly, we say this in meeting after meeting. Reason why and purpose, I won't say it's irrelevant, but we really have to weigh heavily, especially a contributing structure within the historic district, which this has been identified as one. And how you and how your proposal will, encourage and support the current architecture, and then whatever you add in terms of additions and wing, garage, it enhances it even more, it embraces it. And what our historic consultant is saying is that the design as it currently stands would in fact not achieve that. And what we do is that he's not a voting party of the board. He's a hired consultant. He's the historic professional that we rely on for information with regards to historic structures. So we weigh heavily on his opinion, and he's giving you instruction on how that possibly could be, I guess, better designed. I'm sure if we went to public comment, there would be other comments about the structure overall. But for right now, we're just talking about the aesthetics, and it seems to be some concerns about your project and taking away from the current existing contributing structures. What do you say? Its character, historic character.
But most of the character that exists today is not from 1845 or from 1902. Things have changed since the 70s. And I'm not sure what are we trying to achieve? Just that we have a wraparound front porch with reverse gable and 3 over 3
no, I think you pardon me if I'm overstating this, but I think you've underestimated what is surviving. The exterior roof and wall coverings are sacrificial. They get renewed every 20 or 50 years. We're not talking about that.
Oops.
And in fact, unfortunately, these days, we're not even talking about window sashes because they routinely are approved because of thermopane qualities and all the rest of it, as long as they simulate the historical appearance. So we're not even concerned about whether the window sash is 6/6, 6/1 when they were put on. That's not the issue. We do look for some of those features to try to determine, because we're not looking at the interior of the house. So, my assessment of the building is not based on mantelpieces, because I don't see them. You can learn a lot from mantelpieces. We don't see them. I see the front door. That dates from 1845. It's a Greek revival front doorway. That dates the original structure. That doesn't tell me that nothing else happened after that. I know when it was first built. The crawl space and all that supports that, okay? So this is a house that was built in the 1840s, and it was enlarged in the 1870s. It doesn't say that in the inventory form. You don't need to. That's not a good source of that kind of information. That's when those triangular windows were installed. That's when the overhang roof configuration was built. What's important is the massing of the house. That goes to the survival of the structural frame, which is in there. If the house didn't look like that from the outside with its new shingle covering, it wouldn't necessarily have that frame, but you can see that it does. So what is surviving is 80% of the house. It has new shingles, it has new window sashes. That's not significant. So it's the massing of the house that we're looking for. And if you enlarge this in such a way that it absorbs all of that into a new house, you've basically lost what we're trying to preserve visually. Technically, you're preserving it in this new program, but visually, you're losing it into this larger house. And so I'm suggesting there may well be another way of enlarging the existing house in such a way that the roof lines and the massing of it are preserved and are not lost into a bigger building.
Well, part of the difficulties are there are low ceilings in the existing house right now.
That's in the nature of an old house.
Correct.
You can't take an old farmhouse and end up with 12-foot ceilings, or 10-foot, or anything more than about 8.5. That's what it is. You can put a big wing off the back. People build great big rooms off the back of their houses and have like a 2-story room off the back, which wouldn't overwhelm the front. But you can't take that existing structure and go up by a couple of feet and figure out where to put the floors. It's an old farmhouse.
Well, again, part of the program was the road traffic, which we were trying to buffer.
Okay. I understand.
We're just going to go to public comment, and we'll see what the board has to say. So any public comment on the application, please step forward.
Hello, my name is Hilda.
Yeah, step forward, please.
Speak into the microphone, nobody is.
My name is Hilke Klinkenberg. My husband Bernie Braverman and I are immediate neighbors to the Robinsons. We tend to agree with the Architectural Review Board. The house...
The review board has said nothing as of yet.
Well,
The historic consultant made.
that,
Okay.
whatever. Where is it? This that we picked up. Currently, the Robinsons' house and our house are among the larger houses on Hill Street. By tripling the front of that house, they totally changed the nature of the neighborhood, number one, which I don't think is acceptable in a historic district. Number two, the architect kept talking about the noise on Hill Street. Well, the Robinsons live there on the weekends. They're not full-time residents out here. Whatever, but we live there full-time. The noise on Hill Street is not a big issue. The big issue is trying to get out on a weekend, trying to get out onto the street from the driveway. That's not going to change at this point. So I think that his point about the noise on Hill Street and that changing the house is somewhat moot, other than that they put better windows in. The other thing is that by extending the house to within 50 feet of the property line on the east side, they basically put a big solid structure in front of our living room, dining room, and kitchen windows. And there are already trees and bushes and hedges there. There are huge trees. The bushes and hedges do not grow well. So unless they're taking down all those huge trees, there's never going to be a solid bush structure to block that massive wall of house, which I find objectionable as well. So the tripling of the size on the street, The noise level, I think, is moot, and the fact that they're going to build that solid structure right out our living room, dining room, and kitchen windows, I find objectionable. I also question on the plan why they have a water meter in the middle of the lawn between the sidewalk and the road. I mean, since when in that section that's on the outside of their hedges, and it's in the middle of the piece of lawn between the sidewalk and the road, they've got a water meter that they're going to put in there according to the plan. That doesn't make sense to me either. Somehow that,
A water meter or an electric meter?
it says on the
Water-
plan,
water
it
is
says water
underground.
meter. Where'd it go?
Survey.
Would you like me to show you?
Just confirm that it says water.
That doesn't concern us.
It doesn't, but.
There's the sidewalk, there's Hill Street, there's the water meter.
That doesn't mean it's above ground.
Okay. That's a good point, then. Basically, those are our objections to the houses, to the expansion as it stands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more public comment? Please step forward.
My name is Tom Edmonds. I'm the director of the Southampton Historical Museum. I have not spent too much time looking at this plan, but on a quick look, it does seem massive and exaggerated, like Zach Studenross said. I'd like to offer one of our properties, which we just sold, the Captain George White House at 59 North Main Street, which we took several years for us to find a sympathetic buyer. And the Captain George White House is also a vernacular farmhouse from the same period, 1845 to 1850. We found a sympathetic buyer who was able to expand the house at a very busy corner. The Captain George White House is at the corner of Jagger Lane and North Main Street, right next to the grocery store, between the grocery store and the Methodist Church. It's a very busy corner, but as we've been monitoring its progress, and it hasn't just been me, it's been 23 board members and 12 advisors. We've been watching this very carefully because we felt responsible for preserving the character of the neighborhood. And we did that, I think, aesthetically. The plan was approved by our board and the ARB as well. And I would like to offer the architect a tour. I was going to give him my business card, but I don't have one with me. But the Southampton Historical Museum is easy to find. My name is Tom Edmonds, and I would like to have a conversation. The owner and the architect would, I'm sure, freely, show the owner and this architect around as a model. And I think the Captain George White House was important for us to set a model for Southampton and its preservation of its historic buildings and structures. So I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Any more public comment? Please step forward.
My name is Joseph McLaughlin. I live at 436 Hill Street, directly across the street from 445. Gentleman who owns that house now apparently was also the gentleman who owned the property in the back, where they've just built a huge house back there. I don't know if you're all familiar with it. It's in a flag lot. It must be 5,000 square feet. So it seems to me that the gentleman has not been friendly towards the village, nor from the point of view that he didn't take into consideration something like the Southampton Village Comprehensive Plan. I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but New York state law says whenever decisions about zoning, etc., are concerned, the municipalities should follow the guidelines of the comprehensive plan.
Direct your comments to the board, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I would, traffic has been mentioned. I don't know if you all are aware of
The
it.
board, please.
Sorry.
It's okay.
But years ago, they had a traffic advisory committee consisting of all the municipalities within this area, from Bridgehampton to Southampton Village, including Watermill, et cetera, and et cetera. Now, I was a member of that committee, and after meeting for months, we came to the conclusion that the only solution to traffic in the Southampton area was to build the bypass. We had the last meeting was a televised meeting up at the parish building at the hospital, and as I said, our conclusion was to build a highway. Well, that was overridden by Mr. Canusio, because at that meeting, he had said, what we'd like to do is to take the traffic from the highway and shove it down to 27A. So that sort of tickled me a little bit in the wrong way. I had said to him, Mr. Canusio, what you are saying to the people here present is that you're going to take the traffic, shove it down to Hill Street, through the business area, past three schools, Sacred Heart School, the two public schools, and then have it try to leave the 27A and go over to Watermill. Well,
So we appreciate the history.
All right.
The question is, do you have a concern or issue with the
Yes, I
architecture?
do.
Okay.
But just to finish that story quickly, Canusio calls the mayor and he says, you better corral McLaughlin in. Well, anyway,
Didn't work.
no, it didn't. And I was a little upset when I received notice about what was going on here. But with your work there, it sort of calmed me down. But in the comprehensive plan, just to read something for the audience and for the rest of everybody here, it says here, planning rationale. Over the course of the comprehensive planning process, the village articulated concern about residential site development, that new construction was yielding homes out of scale with the preferred small town historic character of the village. Aside from the question of scale on the community-wide level, there are new homes and additions to homes out of scale with their lots, thus harming the visual and aesthetic integrity of the local context. There are also appear to be increasing number of tennis courts, bathhouses, swimming pools, and other accessory structures built on residential properties, contributing to the sense that properties are being overbuilt, though largely within code. Going through the master plan, I had come up with probably 16 or 17 sections of the master plan which followed that same statement that I had just made. They warned everybody, watch out for the big houses in small areas. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more public comment?
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Bill Slight. I'm an architect. I've appeared before this board numerous times representing other clients. Tonight I am here representing myself, concerned about the proposal for this house. I was alerted to this issue by friends in the architecture community, and them knowing that I'm very interested in preservation and am very dedicated to the historic character of the village of Southampton. It's difficult to know where to start to comment on this particular project. Mr. Highsmith, you mentioned that this board is concerned with aesthetics, I know also that this is the Board of Historic Preservation.
That's great.
And your mandate for that it is a very heavy one, in fact, especially for buildings that are in the historic district and which are listed as contributing, which this house is. Your consultant has given you a brief report mentioning that the house was constructed in 1845. And he mentions that it's an example of the Greek Revival style. I would like to amplify that to stress the historic importance of this building with regard to both the character and the history of the village, but also about the particular building and how it is a very, very good example of architecture of that period. And the architecture of that period tells a very important story about our community and about the country. During from about 1830 to about 1860, the Greek Revival style was very, very popular in the United States, and especially in the Northeast, and especially in the state of New York. And the reason for that is that our new nation was enamored with its newfound democracy, and it understood the precedent and the antecedents for that democracy was Greece, and also concurrent with that time, there was a lot of exploration going on in Europe, and a newfound interest in antiquities had occurred. And that is why the Greek Revival style became one that was adopted in the colonies, and was not only because of the cultural interest in the past, but its connection to democracy and to the formation of our nation. This particular house is a very, very good example of the farmhouse style of that architecture. What typifies it is that the gable end faces the street, and that it has a rather low-pitched roof. Oftentimes, they would either complete the pediment or they would leave that incomplete, which in this particular case is there. But what does express the pediment in this particular example is the triangular window, which is in the pediment form at the top of the house. This house was a typical, the form of this house was a typical three-bay example where you had two principal large-scale windows and a doorway. The doorway in this particular house is a prime and beautiful example of that particular expression of architecture. It is a solid door with side lights on each side of it, a lighted transom above it, and fluted or articulated trim, heavy trim around that doorway. The doorway is a very, very important part of this particular style. Also, this particular building has in the cornice of the gable of this house, it has an enlarged entablature and also cornices, and there's also some small corner boards or small pilasters expressed on the corners of the house. Also typical of the farmhouse expression of the Greek Revival house is the wraparound porch on the house that expands the front of the house and also wraps around the east side of it. And in the farmhouse expression, typical of that were the carved square columns, which you find in this particular house, and the low-pitched roof. This house is a very, very intact and architecturally pure example of this particular style of architecture, and it would be a loss to see that expression subsumed into the design that's being presented tonight. Now that takes us to the next part about this particular design, because The enlargement of this house not only subsumes or makes makes dependent rather than principal the existing building, it also, the size of it is very out of character with the other buildings in the neighborhood. And it also obliterates the farmhouse quality of this house, which therefore destroys the historic expression of this house. This particular property is more than an acre in size, and the house that we're dealing with has been added to over the years, and appropriately in the north-south orientation, that is toward the back of the house. And that is a very typical way that homes were added to, especially in New England. And I'd like to refer the board to a book called Big House, Little House, Back House, Barn. And this whole book is about how houses grew organically, especially in New England, especially farmhouse buildings, where the house was, as the owners became more prosperous, would add to the house, and eventually the house would grow and grow, and sometimes even link up with the farm buildings that were on other parts of the property, and it would grow organically in that way. So the appropriate way of expanding this house would not be to make it wider, but would to make it longer. And this particular property has the advantage of having plenty of property toward the north part of the property on which this house could be enlarged. The design that is being presented to you changes this house from a farmhouse into some kind of either a large estate house, or even, I would suggest, a building that looks more like a hotel than looks like a domestic building. It is so large and makes this part of the house basically into a wing of that house, and the farmhouse loses its expression of its doorway. The new entrance takes over at the center, and the architect mentioned that the new part is only being regressed from the face of what is the existing facade of the house by about 5 feet. So it is really being absorbed fully into this new building. This board in the Village Code in sections 65.4 and 65.5 mentions that the board has to consider what's called a declaration of appropriateness for the property. And in the first, in the very early paragraphs of 65.4, it mentions that the board has to take a number of things into consideration: the size of the building, the scale, the scale of any additions that were being made to it in relation to the proportion of the house and in relationship to the proportion of other homes on the street, and also the relationship of the proportion of the new structure in relationship to the other homes nearby. This house does not fit into the character of what is happening on other nearby properties. I would urge the members of this board to go and walk this property because, and I have not seen the plan for this house, but there are some significant trees on this property. Some of them probably date back to when this house was built. They look to be at least a couple hundred years old. I'm wondering whether or not what is proposed in the new building, as it is built to the east, will destroy those trees. trees and plantings are mentioned in 65-4 as being.
We haven't gotten as far as talking or discussing a landscape plan.
I understand that.
Within the
and
historic district.
I'm just asking you to take a look at that
Understood.
and
I
include
think
that in your consideration.
Everything that you've said.
Nor
with-
is it the most important thing, but it is one of the things that
I-
you can take
Absolutely, and we take, especially within the historic district, we take in consideration landscape scale as well. Everything you've said, kind of,
Right. Now-
in a more winded way, expresses the same thing that Zach has mentioned in his report, as well as other neighbors. have
I
mentioned.
understand
So,
that, and I am here to strengthen that because a public record has to be made about this house.
I think-
And a public record has to be made as to why the people in the village appreciate this house and why they appreciate historic preservation and what goes into that and why this house is seen as being part of the fabric of the village and why it's important to be preserved and in the expression that it has.
But what I will say to you is, I think we've allowed, probably more than normal and more than typically, we've allowed you to express what those concerns and those issues have been. You've given us a nice historical
You know,
evaluation.
I'm not asking to be allowed. I have a right to speak this. And
Now you're being a little more disrespectful.
No, I'm
And
not being, no,
respectful
no, I'm
to
not
you,
being
and I don't know where that-
disrespectful.
where that
I
came
am just
from.
simply saying
But
to you, you don't have to allow me. Okay.
I disagree with you. At this time, this board's responsibility is to hear all individuals, including the public.
Right.
But at the same time, we have a right, as a board, and I, as the chair of this board, to allow you as much time as allowed. But then when your time has been expired, it's time for you to please allow other people
I
to
didn't
speak.
know that you gave me a time to work in.
Excuse me?
You didn't tell me I had only.
You're absolutely correct. I didn't give an exact time. What I said
And
to you is that we've allowed.
You just decided you don't want to hear anything more from me, is that what you said?
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. What I
So-
said is I've allowed more time than this board has usually and typically allowed in the past. And we've done so because you are painting a very good record in terms of the historical nature of the structure.
That's the intent of what
I understand that, and I appreciate that. But I want you to understand, we still have a right.
I didn't come here to offer you opinions. I offered you to try to explain to you some of the facts about this particular style. I came here to offer you some information. And, you know, oftentimes you allow people to go on and on with nothing more than opinion. And I'm giving you at least information that has some factual basis.
I don't know what the challenge of the board is coming
I don't understand
from.
why you're wasting my time and the board's time arguing with me about whether to allow me to speak a little bit.
Okay, and now we're going to ask that another person speak. So if you could excuse him, please, Ren.
And if I want to add to my comments, I can come up again, can't I?
If you want to add more substantive information
That's right.
about the application, could we please allow someone else to speak?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public discussion? Please step forward.
I'm Ann Pine, 449 Hill Street, adjacent to the Robertsons. The Bravermans are on one side, and we're on the other side. Our house is really a twin to their house. We have slightly higher ceilings, but the internal arrangement and the external architecture is the same, minus the Greek Revival detailing. We live closer to Hill Street than the Robertsons, and we're oriented the same way. And just a brief comment, we don't notice the noise at all. When we're in our backyard, we're oblivious to Hill Street. I know that's not the point, so I'll move on. I also feel in an historic district that we should be able to see the houses, partially screened for privacy, but not completely eliminated. So I would hate this house to be so screened that we didn't know it was there. It's a great pleasure for the residents of Southampton to go up and down Hill Street and see the houses behind the hedges or through the trees or through the bushes. And so I hope that what you do allow is something that will look historic the way this does and will be able to be seen. I also feel there's a pattern. I've studied the maps of the area of the front house is not the only house on the property that helps people live in it. There are accessory buildings. And this lot is large enough to have a separate garage in the back and a separate pool house in the back, rather than just have a mass built on, which I personally think is very unattractive. I would rather see this house restored in a beautiful way, like the Halsey house has been further down the street by Mr. Kratz and Mr. Coburn. That's a beautiful job, and I'm sure it's a very livable house inside. I'd rather see this house remain as it is, be tweaked in various ways so that it's more livable, and be restored so that it's healthy and there's no mold, and have accessory buildings in the back that would allow for entertainment, for cars, for storage. I think that's very in the pattern of the historic area. This house used to have a barn behind it. It used to have several other accessory buildings. I would also like to talk a minute about the fabric of Hill Street between Moses and Corrigan. This is really an exceptional area. The original settlers of this village all built houses, farmhouses here in the 1840s to 1860s. They were second and third sons. They were whalers. They came back to farming. They knew each other. And the houses they built in this period of time are still there, and they have each of them has a high level of historic integrity. This tells, I know the architect was touching on this, but it really tells the story, not just of architecture, but of what this village was. These were men who were struggling after the Revolution. The farmland was poor. They went off to sail. They came back with some money, the luckier ones, and they built houses they were really proud of, and they were all related to each other. And I have a booklet here. I'd just like you to look at it. It's not too accurate, but it traces the entire history of the 8 houses that are contributing factors to the district. And it's 8 out of 10 on North Hill Street here. And I really, really would love you to preserve our street, because it's going to tell a bigger story as time goes on. It's a concentration of these farmhouses. There's a Greek Revival, there's one with Gothic touches, there are little ones that date probably from the early 1810s that show how small life was before whaling. There are some larger ones, like the Anderson Chappell House that was expanded by Amar Embry, the wonderful New York City architect. And so it shows people came back, they wanted to show off. Some are more prominent than others. We don't want a house that was a little less prominent to suddenly be huge and diminish the pride of these men who were proud of their houses. I think this block tells an amazing story. And I also, they're all in good shape. People have taken care of them, and nice lives exist within them. People didn't have 10, I studied the census, they didn't have 10 children at this point in history. They had 2, they had 3, they had 1. They took care of a mother in a back house, and I think we still live the same way today. You know, I don't think we're in 10 children families, and I think the house I see being planned is not what this area is about now, or nor was it about then. And let me just see if I've forgotten anything. I do want to show you my graphic rendition of the proportion of things. I have a picture of myself in front of the Robertsons' house because they're friends, and they last year let me measure their house for my little projects. And I think this pretty much shows what's going on. But it's not about scale entirely. It's about character. It's a farmhouse, and it has to stay a farmhouse. And I don't care if you turn it the other way. It's still not going to be a farmhouse if it looks anything like that. And I'd be happy for accessory buildings that are conforming, that are within scale, and I think they make, I live with accessory buildings, and they enable us to live in these farmhouses in a wonderful way. I mean, we don't have to have a pig trough, we can have a swimming pool. You know, we don't have to have a horse thing, we can have a garage, but I think I've got maps here that back up, I've got census, I've got other things, and I'd be happy to print them at some point, but I don't think they're necessary tonight. Thank you.
Any new public comment? Hi, Board. We've heard from our consultant, we've heard from the community, we've heard from several individuals who have some concerns not only about the contributing structure within the historic district, but what could possibly be a detriment to that existing structure, in, especially in mass and overall change of the character of the house in its current proposal. Brian, do you have any comments about the application as a whole?
I agree with what I've heard tonight, and I appreciate all the history and the education. It's always good to know more about Hill Street when you're not from here. And I do agree that this is the type of development of an historic house that we're really trying to not allow.
Christine?
I agree with Zachary, and I feel like the original house is completely lost in the new addition, and that's not what our historic preservation is all about.
Jeff?
Pretty much the same thing, that the addition is grossly, and I use that in every sense of the word, out of character with the historical nature of the house and the neighborhood. I think some of the suggestions from the members, Zach, Mr. Slade, Mr. Edmonds, Doug, perhaps you want to take those to heart. My wife's family lives in a house that has, not in this neighborhood, but part is 1700s, part is 1800s, and then it's all modern in the back, and from the street, you can see the difference.
Can I comment?
You can.
I appreciate the comments that, from the people that came up. I just want to clarify, the house is around 3,600 square feet now. It is going to 6,000 square feet. It's not being tripled, it's being maybe doubled in size. The 50-yard side yard setback that was mentioned, we do have landscape plans. I don't know if we, apparently we're not going to get into that, but we are buffering the neighbors as it is, and we were going to continue to do that with landscape buffering. The one gentleman that mentioned about the traffic reports, apparently there are issues. Some people maybe just tone it out more than others, but there is a traffic concern that the Robertsons have with the noise that comes into the backyard. And that was the basis for turning the house east-west instead of north-south. I appreciate the architectural comments. We tried to work with those details. Perhaps the scale needs to be looked at, but I don't know how we are going to get past the issue of the noise with Hill Street.
Okay. At this time, the design overall has some issue in terms of mass as well as design. So unfortunately, you have to go back to your client, discuss. I would definitely bring the minutes, maybe a video of the meeting overall, see the consensus and the tone of the meeting itself, and discuss a alternative plan and present it before the board. Any further questions?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. So you're requesting the adjourn so that you can prepare yourself for the next meeting, correct?
Yes.
Motion to approve applicant's request to adjourn.
I make a motion that we approve the applicant William Scarlett Robinson on 445 Hill Street request to adjourn to our next meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Next application, please.
Next application is A. Gugliata Development.
Don't do that to me. I can't tonight. I can't let you speak, please.
Good evening. Good evening, Robert Fischetti, Ferdinand Fischetti, 320 Hampton Road, Southampton. I'm here on behalf of the applicant and owner for 330 Hill Street, which is located, it's a 27,837 square foot lot in the R20 zone. It's located on the corner of Hill Street and Roscoe Drive. This is an application to demolish the existing house and accessory greenhouse /
Before we
garage.
start, contributing?
I don't believe so. I'll have to review the thing. Let me see. No,
It's built in
not contributing.
by the current owner's uncle and his father in early 40s, and they finished after the war. After that, there are no COs on the file in the building department. It's a wood shingle house, as you can see. As I said, constructed in the early 40s. There's no historic inventory that I'm aware of, and it's not on any registry that I've been able to find.
So you're looking for a certificate of appropriateness to tear it down?
Correct.
Do you have a plan or a proposal to build something new?
Not at this point because we're a contract vendee, so once we know we can go forward with the transaction, then they'll put the time and effort into what's going to be built there. A single-family residence. My client, Tony Anthony Gugliotta, has built in the village before. It's Lewis Street. What number is Lewis Street?
44.
44 Lewis Street. Halsey Street, several houses before, traditional wood shingle structure proposed, but not at this time. This is strictly just for the demolition.
Because the structure, and I think I would want at least something on record indicating that it's not a contributing structure, and only because of that reason. It's a non-contributing structure within the historic district. We would not necessarily need renderings or elevations for new construction. Under normal circumstances, it would be this board's recommendation, if there was a contributing structure, to see what's replacing it, but also to vet over the reasons why you feel that the structure would not be a contributing structure. You would still have to come back before this board, so I don't have any issue with the applicant considering council's viewpoint, consultant's viewpoint with regards to the non-historical significance. Brian, do you have any issues or concerns?
No.
Chris? Jeff?
No.
Any public comment on the application? Please step forward.
I live in, on
Your name for
Leo's
the record,
Lane.
please.
Huh?
Your name for the record?
Thayer Bigelow. I live on Leo's Lane. We drive by this structure all the time. We very enthusiastically support the application because it's a house that should be torn down. Just wanted to support it.
A rarity. Thank you.
We're all in shock.
Please step forward. If you're coming for support, you're going to have it. Okay. Okay. Please step forward.
My name is Carol Welch. I live at 340 Hill Street, the house next door. I did my house 8 years ago. I did it myself. I was not allowed to tear the house down. It's built on an 1890 foundation. There was absolutely nothing historical about my house except its age. The house had been horribly abused, renovated inside. It was full of mold, but I was forbidden to take that house down.
I don't know your application. I don't know the reasons why that was the case.
And believe me, I don't like living next door to what I'm living next door to because I've had all kinds of issues. But I'm also very concerned about demolishing the house and what is going to be put up there. Because I kept my house. My house is only 2,400 square feet. I kept the footprint of the house. I preserved the house, you know, to the extent that the town required me to. And it fits in the neighborhood. It's a small house. So I do not want to be sitting there subject to some, 5,000 square foot house looming over me. I've put up with enough from what I've been living next to for 8 years.
So please understand that this is just for a demo request. If and when they decide to do, present and propose a new construction, it has to come back before this board, which means you'll be noticed and mailed, so you'll know when the meeting happens, and you're able to come here and take a view and go to the building department, look at the elevations, and make any comments you wish to this board about your like or dislike of the application when proposed. Today is just a demo request.
And once the house is demoed, is it allowed to stay vacant for any period of time?
You have to discuss that with the building department on the terms of how long a parcel can be demoed and what the status of the parcel is, whether it has to be fenced in or if it has, I'm sure that the village will not allow the parcel just to be overgrown and not well maintained and manicured.
In that case, no house is better than the house that's there. Thank you.
Very good. Any more public comment? All right. Doesn't seem to have the any issues with the board. It is in the historic district, and even though we're recommending and will allow, we still need it in writing.
I understand.
So we will empower our council to prepare a written decision at the next meeting. Any questions?
No, nope.
Motion to close for written decision by council.
Curtis, I would suggest that you condition that also upon just having Zach put a written report into the file to the effect of what you just said. Will do.
Thank you. A motion with the recommendation that our historic consultant adds into the record his report on the non-contributing structure.
Okay. I make a motion that we close for written decision by council the Gugliotta development on Hill Street with the provision that our historic consultant puts into the record his report on the structure.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Concludes our historic applications for this evening. First application, non-historic.
Village of Southampton.
Hi, guys. Mark Elpley, Mayor of the Village of Southampton, representing Village and Southampton Ambulance. And Dominic, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dominic Lapierre, 18 Main Street, Stott Architecture.
Okay.
We were here last, you had request materials, and we're here to show the different materials that are being used. Dominic.
Hi, Rick Stott offers his apologies. He had a family hospital-type medical issue that he had to attend to. Otherwise, he'd be here. My name's Dominic Lapierre. I work with Rick. I was also the architect for the Village of Southampton new firehouse down the road on Hampton Road. I'm not sure the history of the project in great detail. I know you've heard it before. Mark can share some light on it. We're here with a variety of materials. I think some of them you may have seen before, if I'm correct. Starting at the bottom, if you don't mind, is that correct? Proceed that way. We have a stone base. I believe you have the drawings already. It's a recycled product. We have stucco, which is a light gray product above the stone base. We're going to have a trim product. I believe this is maybe the second choice, is natural wood, mahogany looking. And we have a proposed recycled product, 95% recycled, slate roof. I think maybe at the previous meeting there was some concern about the colors that were selected in the past. You'll see that we've gotten rid of one of the colors, which may have been a burgundy or a red.
Yes.
And we're coming to you here tonight with only the gray and the green.
So you've made the change from the burgundy to the...
Burgundy has left the building.
Thank you for allowing that to leave. Appreciate it. Board members, last meeting we had concerns about not actually seeing the materials that are being used. Also concerns about the roof, especially the what seemingly be the out of character color of the maroon, and I think it was maroon and green, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Maroon and green.
These two colors, including the maroon, there were three colors actually.
Okay, yes. So the elimination of the maroon, now it's just the green and gray. Brian, any comments?
It's amazing how getting rid of the maroon changes the entire presentation. No, I think it blends together. I can start now to see some relationship with the police building. I think that's a big step in the right direction.
Christine?
I have no comment. Fine.
Jeff?
Just in terms of the communication towers, that seemed to be an issue that wasn't quite laid out, resolved, subject to potential other things happening on the property, whether they were going to be on the building or in the back, where I think Mark, there's another facility being built or something like that?
That's the location for the sewage treatment plant area, which we don't have that design yet. We'll hopefully have a meeting within the next month and a half to bring the public up to speed on where we're at with that. I mean, the communications piece is driven by the potential of a cell tower on site there, which may, if it's installed, would include the emergency communications. If it's not installed there, they have to have antennas on the building. And they'll be structured up there. They'll blend into the building, and it won't be, but it's, we're not going to compromise the quality of the emergency responses for, something that someone might view as visually not pleasing.
Yeah, no, it was more a matter with today's technology that they can disguise them, mask them, build them in. And it wasn't clear from the architect whether or not that was envisioned or could in fact be done.
Because we actually don't have a final on that. But I know the drawings showed a series of antennas across the top of the building. I mean, ideally, I'd love to have something else. I'd prefer to have the tower that had cell phone, and which would improve a lot of communications around here. So, but that's the. But if it has to be up there, they're going to have to install the towers up there.
Any public comment on the application? Nothing further from the board? Motion to approve.
Make a motion, we approve the application of the Village of Southampton on Windmill Lane for the 2-story ambulance barn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks for the time, guys.
Thank you very much.
Next application, please.
The next application has a letter to adjourn, Meadowmere Partners.
Motion to approve applicant's request to adjourn. Is there a date given?
I make a motion that we approve the applicant Meadowmere Partners LLC on Meadowmere Lane, letter to request to adjourn to our next meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next application, please.
Next application is Louise Gould, 104 Lewis Street.
Good evening, members of the board, Mr. Studenroth, Mr. Robinson. My name is Monica Navia. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Burke and Sullivan, 41 Meeting House Lane, Southampton, New York, 11968. I have a letter here from the office of Bennett and Reed from John Bennett, who represents Ms. Louise Gould, the owner of 104 Lewis Street, and wherein they're authorizing the contract vendee, the builder, who we are representing, to proceed with this application and any additional applications before this board. So I'd like to submit this letter so that it's in the record. I also have copies of photos of the property at 104 Lewis Street that I'd like to give each board member. So there's 1, 2, 3.
Just so that we can understand procedurally
Mm-hmm.
why you're before us. Your application is to demo the existing structure. Reason for you're before us now is there's a question whether the property, whether the house rises to the merit of a historic structure outside of the historic district, and therefore possible designation. This came up because of the age of the parcel and the potential for Zach to do some type of evaluation to identify whether it was a contributing structure outside the historic district. Zach, have you had the opportunity to do a research on the property and?
Yeah, I don't have that report with me. I guess it's in the file. But in essence, I think that question has already been answered. this individual building does not necessarily qualify as an individual landmark in the village, but it has already been recognized as a contributing element in a National Register district. So that answers the question of architectural significance. So the question before us now is, how does this board recognize that reality with regard to our own village code, which has not as yet recognized that National Register district as a local district? So we have a building that is clearly deemed architecturally significant. It has interest. Otherwise, it would not have been included in the list of contributing houses within the National Register district, which is called the Lewis Street Expansion Area. There are houses in that district, that National Register district, which are not considered contributing. They did not meet architectural interest or historical interest. So this one did. This is one of the contributing resources in the National Register district. So it has already answered the question of architectural interest, historical interest. Just hasn't answered the question of how does this board treat that architectural interest? Does this board choose to elevate that National Register district to local or not?
Well, this board's mechanism or tool, it has its designation. That we know procedurally, just in case for the record, we identify what that process is. So, this board recommends that the project be designated as a historic, because of its historic significance, rises to the level that it could go to designation, and then begins a public hearing to discuss that. And then after applicants able to either determine whether it is or not, and the community has vetted out the process to see whether it should or should not, this board makes a vote to designate the property. So at this time, does it rise to the level of designation, which is the only tool we have as a board?
As an individual building?
That would be.
Well, I guess I'm trying to say something else, and I'm not saying it very well. The process by which our local districts were designated, which is somewhat counterintuitive. You think you start on the local level and then you think globally. Actually, it works the other way. All of our districts, of which we have 4, began as National Register districts, which in turn were recognized locally. That's the process. This particular one was created later, about 5 years later, and was never recognized locally. So it has remained a National Register district. The procedure at this point could be for this board to take up again the matter of whether or not that district should be recognized locally or not. And this, among the 50 or 60 other contributing buildings in that district, would similarly then be regarded as local landmarks. That's the natural process. So while we're only looking at the application of one building, it raises, to the first time, as far as I know, since 1991, the opportunity or the challenge of, once again, looking at that National Register district and determining whether or not it should be the subject of a series of hearings to consider whether that district, which would then convey landmark status upon all the contributing resources in it, of which this is one, whether that process should be triggered. I feel the challenge here is that if this individual property is granted demolition, then every single contributing building in that National Register district will similarly be regarded as unworthy of landmark recognition. So this is a big challenge for this board.
Then I go to procedure, and I yield to counsel with regards to procedure. There's a national registry that, as of this date we haven't acknowledged or recognized as the means by which we've, well, at least used as a tool for possible identifying an additional historic district that what currently exists, and using that expansion tool as part of our decision process. We haven't to date. So that would be a precedent that we begin today moving forward. I know we've talked about in the past having public comments about expanding the historic district based on some of the information we've already gathered in previous works that Zach has been a part of. Killing two birds with one stone. Is that another process we can do where we have conversations and discussions where we expand the overall historic district to be expanded, or using this as a foot tool currently? And what would be the impact of this board if we were to do so?
Well, I do think there are substantial legal issues involved with both sides of this, and I think that it needs to be researched. I think the board does need some legal counseling on this issue. I don't know what more we can present this evening that is going to add to the facts upon which I can start a review, but I don't think we should go any farther with it until we have a legal position on it. It'll take me some time to prepare.
Very good. And I don't disagree with that. Before we move forward, as chair of the board, I would definitely I wouldn't feel comfortable making a decision one way or another, especially in a very important decision such as this, which will start not only a precedent, but possibly a legal concern for this board and the village of Southampton. So, I'm sorry, I'm sure you have more to say.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, first off, I've appeared before this board several times, and I am a proponent of preserving the history of the village of Southampton. However, after careful review of Mr. Studenroth's report, first off, it starts off with, it is not in the historic district. Now, this is a house, if you look at your packet, so that everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with it, 104 Lewis Street. Miss Louise Gould has been living there since 1945. About 50 years ago, and just so that the record is clear, the house was constructed approximately 1913, so it's about 103 years old. About 50 years ago, the entire siding was redone, so now it's aluminum siding. About almost in 2003, the chimney was replaced. There was a new roof. The front steps were replaced. So there's been extensive renovations, alterations to the house. And as I understand it, under the code, we have to look at not only the age of the house, and of course this exceeds the approximate 50 years, it has to be older than, but also want to focus on the significance and the number one question, does it still look much the way it did in the past? And my resounding answer would be absolutely not. There's been extensive alterations, modifications, and based on this board's review, it has to not just take into account the fact that, yes, I have done the research on the village of Southampton, on the Lewis Street expansion area, which was added in 1993. But I ask this board to look at this application solely on this property and not as if it's one with others and trying to make it into a historic district. I'm looking at this house, and I'm asking you to focus on the fact that due to the fact that there has been significant alterations, and again, this board is charged with only what can be seen from the street and not the interior.
Which we've not mentioned anything interior.
Right, but I want to make sure that's what we're focusing on from the street. So after, and based on Mrs. Gould, who has vehemently and would either come here at some point or through affidavit, give a list of all the changes, modification, alterations. As you can see in your packet, it looks very different than when it did in 1913. And if this board, and based on the three characteristics, age, integrity, and significance. So yes, the house is 103 years old. Integrity, does it still look much the way it did in the past? Absolutely not. And significance, is the property associated with events,
I would venture to
activities?
say any house that's over 100 years old has had some type of facelift over the years. So does that necessarily mean that it now, because it's changed its siding, drawing out any of the historical significance of the structure?
No, we had that discussion earlier this evening with that proposed house on Hill Street. I would also indicate that in the research and the proposal leading up to the formation of the Lewis Street expansion area, the State Preservation Office in Albany will not accept a nomination, and they process these on behalf of the federal government. They do not accept and process an application for a district in which there is a significant opposition among property owners. In fact, they look for a substantial approval and support among property owners. And I would note that if you look at the inventory form that was prepared for this particular property, Ms. Gould was in fact the owner at that time. My presumption, I haven't checked all those records, they exist in Albany to this day, because they don't throw anything out. I would suggest that she supported this nomination of this district at that time. She was certainly well aware of it.
And I would prefer that Ms. Gould be here the next time, or an affidavit, because I don't want that in the record if in fact she did not approve it.
That is certainly a possibility. I'm simply pointing out that that's in the nature of putting a district together. The property owners are consulted, and they need to reach a consensus among the owners. So there was at that time a significant and substantial agreement or approval to recognize the houses of that neighborhood as a coherent district, which they indeed were. You know, if you're looking to prove the negative, which is that, well, this house either then or subsequently has lost the architectural integrity which it had at that time, I would like to look at pictures from 1991. I think substantially it retains the massing, the character. Certainly as you drive by, you wouldn't be scratching your head thinking, I wonder when that house could have been built. Could it have been built in the 1980s? No, maybe a little earlier. It's a Dutch colonial style house. It retains its massing, its roof form, all the significant elements that you can read it as such from the street. If the siding's been changed, the sashes, those are the normal updates. If the brick chimney's been rebuilt. So that would be another case to suggest, but to my view, and I haven't studied it that closely, I think it's substantially still standing. It's been updated, but not significantly changed. That's my view.
And duly noted, and I respect your view. However, I am here representing one property. This is not up for debate to discuss the Lewis Street expansion area. And unless you want all the other houses and all the other owners of those houses to be present at the next meeting, I'm asking you to look at this one particular house that has been significantly altered and modified. And if I can finish from when I was pointing out significance, is the property associated with events, activities, developments that were important in the past? No, the lives of people who were important in the past. There was no one famous or had any historical achievements on record that lived in that house. Does it have the potential to yield information through archaeological investigation about our past? No. And I ask Mr. Studenroth, in your report, you said the house potentially meets two village landmark criteria, number 1 and 3, as one of over 60 contributing resources. Now, those words, potentially, contributing, I'd like to know exactly if, number one, you said special character or historic aesthetic interest or value as part of cultural, political, economic, or social history of locality, region, state, and nation. And you circled yes. And for my further,
What was in my mind at that time? What could I have possibly been thinking?
well, that's why I'm here today,
That's your
because I
question?
have a,
Yeah. My reason for circling those, you have to realize that if we treat this house as if it were simply on Lewis Street, there was no National Register District, just as there are many lovely older homes on Elm Street that are north of the cutoff line. They fall into a category in which we go out and evaluate them for their character and their interest, because they might be potentially designated as individual landmarks in the village. That is the only mechanism that we now have for preserving an older home that has architectural and historical interest, which is not within the historic district. And this technically and actually falls into that category. It's not in one of our local districts. So, however, it presents a very special challenge to us, because I would be willing to suggest that every one of the 60 buildings in that district do not individually meet any of the criteria for being individually landmarked in the village. Well, then what's the National Register District all about? If collectively they represent something of local historical value and interest, then we're missing something here. Collectively, they do represent something.
but again, we're not here
You're
to
not.
discuss collectively the.
I would say that, I agree, you're not here, but I'm suggesting that this board needs to think about that. And that's why I used the word suggest on the form.
Understood. And if this board would so like, we can have Mrs. Gould, who's been there since 1945, who is sort of in shock that it's come to this point because of all the changes that have been done to it. And yes, it happens to be on Lewis Street. In your own report, you said it's a contributing resource, but looking at the house in and of its own, not just as part of this collective, because that's not what the board, as I understand, is here to do. If you want to use this as sort of,
Well,
to try to set precedent,
you're
that's-
interpreting that, and what we've asked is, we've asked that our legal counsel interpret that for us, to interpret whether, in fact, we can use that standard on this particular application. So.
Which
I
standard?
get what you're saying, I understand, use the fact that we have.
The collective standard.
Collective standard, yes. So we've asked our counsel to prepare that. At this point, I'm not trying to shorten or try to take away from your ability to present your application as suggested earlier. I will just say that we have asked counsel to do so, so allow us just that time to vet out the process to see where we stand as a board. In the same time, I would say that you prepare yourself, understanding some of the challenges that we're faced with, understanding some of the concerns, especially as it pertains to that particular area, which quite frankly was one of the reasons why we elected to expand the historic district, because of some of the lost treasures that have happened, especially on Lewis Street, which we feel that we could have salvaged, and we definitely lost the opportunity. So one of the two mechanisms are at our disposal. Either council will suggest that we can use that method, or we start conversations about expanding the historic district. And that may be the process by which we go through. We don't know. Allow council to prepare that at our next meeting, and we'll discuss.
Very optimistic that it's going to be here at the next meeting.
So that I understand
I'm
this.
being optimistic.
So that I understand this, and this is Mr. Robinson, you're going to be discussing with the
We agree
board
with you.
whether you're going to be looking at
We
the
agree with-
Lewis
we
Street
agree with you
expansion.
that the threshold question here is whether or not this should be looked at individually or as part of a collective assimilation of all the other properties, and how the board should proceed in the event of either.
And if that happens, were they going to bring all the other 60-plus
We don't know.
homeowners?
We have to get to first base before we go to second. But all I can say is Louise is certainly going to be unhappy given the time frame involved. But I think, as you agree, that you're advocating that this be considered individually on its own merits, and that might be the way that this should proceed. But it might not, and the board needs to be educated about that. You're welcome to submit a memo of law to us for the perspective of your client and the benefit of your client. But we need to answer this question first before we can go further. And if it resolves itself that it's best to treat this individually, we will have agreed with you and they can move forward. If some other direction is deemed advisable or the best way to go, then the board will be, it'll be recommended to the board to proceed in that direction. But I don't have an answer to your question at the moment.
Okay. Well, I guess to proceed with a legal memo, I would need to know why Mr. Studenroth would have put yes to both the special character and why he believes it embodied the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural style. Because
I would
if I
think
don't
that
have
would
the
be
answers-
considered a fact, not a legal issue. The legal issue is what powers does an administrative board have to consider either alone or collectively? That's the issue. Whether or not it's got the power at this stage to consider this as part of the Lewis Street District, or whether, for any number of reasons, it might be precluded.
Okay.
Or it's discretionary, right?
Okay.
So that's the issue. I'll have to defend Mr. Studenroth's private opinion as
And in terms
being
of,
an opinion.
you know, the gambrel, which I'm also researched and familiar with, the new home, and you should have the plans in the files that would be built, would be a gambrel as well.
Well, there are no plans, and you have not proposed a new set of.
I'll make sure you have those, but it would be.
It would be helpful to
gambrel.
see what will be replaced. Definitely be helpful if you take in some of the characteristics of the existing home, and in fact, you made it incorporated into the new design. You know, all things are relevant, and we would hope that we would see something at least leaning towards, not necessarily replicating, but taking some of the existing design and including it into whatever new design you're proposing.
Okay, so at this point, I'll go back to my client and Mrs. Gould.
Can you name your client?
I'm sorry?
Your client?
Is the contract vendee, Michael White.
Okay, thank you.
So I will let him know that at this point, we're going to decide whether you're going to be looking at this property on its own or whether you have the power to look at it as a collective, which again, we disagree, obviously.
If I could just, Curtis, those reports, they're not really reports, just a form with
Mhm.
boxes to check on. If it would be helpful in this process, I could expand on these points that you're bringing up, which is why I felt that this particular house met 2 of the village criteria. That's not explained on the form, it's just circle a yes or a no. I don't know if this is relevant to.
I think it's
our
relevant
discussion.
in terms of substance of creating
I could
an
just
overall
expand
record.
on that form.
And at some point, because this has come up to us for what probably will be written decision, it will help council in preparing that written decision.
Okay, so I'll do that.
Any further public comment? Anything further from the board? Anything further from?
Nope, I'll have my client here, both of them, both Mrs. Gould.
Don't do that until you get
Okay.
approval from me that I've got something ready,
Okay.
and there's no chance I'm going to have it ready by the next meeting.
Would you recommend that at least we submit an affidavit from her listing all the alterations, changes?
It's no need to submit anything, Monica, until we see
Got
what
it.
direction we want to go.
Okay.
You know, it may or may not be necessary. You don't
Okay.
necessarily need to do it. But again, if you'd like to research that issue, any input you have would be appreciated.
Okay.
It would be considered and appreciated.
Thank you.
Asking to adjourn?
Yes.
Motion to approve applicant's request to adjourn.
I make a motion that we approve the applicant Louise Gould at 104 Lewis Street, request to adjourn to our next meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next application, please.
Next application is Bencor Building Corp.
Good evening, Michael Berenger, architect for the applicant. Where we left off, we had we were able to obtain, kind of broker an agreement with the neighbor about the screening, and I believe that was sent to the board. And it's the same agreement that I had submitted at the last meeting, but they felt they didn't have enough opportunity to consider it, and they've considered it and are happy with the screening that we're offering them.
Public comment on the application? Didn't we have the same, did they send an email or a message? They did?
They
I
submitted,
have copies of it.
they submitted a letter in the file. Curtis.
Yeah, it was
It
an
says-
it was an
it says-
email to us, correct?
Yeah, for the record, we have agreed to the proposal to plant 8 25-foot evergreens as screening, which should address the privacy issue. There's additional verbiage, but that.
Understood. We do have that in part of record. I do recall seeing the email. The concern we had was that you've said a consensus of you and the neighbor was met, and we did not have any
Right.
representation
No, we
here
had
to.
a friendly exchange on the whole thing, and I think it's what the board was
Helpful.
hoping
Thank you.
for us to accomplish.
Motion to approve.
I make a motion that we approve the application of Ben Carr Building Corporation on West Prospect Street.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Next application, please.
Frederick Eaton, driveway gates.
Is the applicant present? Is the applicant present? Motion to adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn the application of Frederick Eaton on Moses Lane for driveway gates.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Next application, please.
Leah Marie Rosalia on Elm Street. Small one's coming.
Franklin Rosalia, 145 Elm Street, owner and contractor. I apologize for just getting things in today. We tried hard to simplify for the board's request the whole house. Some of the examples, we reduced the size of the tower in the front. We set it back almost 2 foot. We also set the porch back, the front porch back about 1 foot. The whole left side of the house, the whole mass was pushed back. We also, by setting the tower back, we also straightened the line on the front porch. The fascia line is all straight across now, much cleaner and simpler. There was a mid-level detail running around the whole house almost. We eliminated that, all 4 sides of the house. The master bedroom on the rear had somewhat of a turret, I guess you could call it. We removed that and just put a simple rectangular box out. On the front, we previously had a second level balcony, a railing detail, but we took that out, put a simple small dormer, shared dormer in the front, again, to try to simplify the overall look of the house from the street and from the 2 sides as you approach it.
So the street impact was a 2-foot setback further, correct?
For the tower, yep, and the porch was a 1 foot setback. Tower section in the front, part, we set back 2 foot.
Give some time. It's the first time seeing the plans.
Sorry.
Okay. thank you for eliminating the second-story deck. I have some concerns with just a 1-foot change in the front yard setback. I think that was one of the major issues or concerns with some of the neighbors that the streetscape had some concerns with the, I know that, what is it, north side of Elm Street, is it north or south? Elm Street goes
West.
West. West side of Elm Street had homes that were closer to the road, whereas the other side, they were a little further away. You were right in the middle. I mean, you literally are the beginning of the step forwards going further into the village. And it's just one of those things where it's maybe disconcerting still because you're also one of the larger homes being proposed. So I just want to, I'm seeing this for the first time. 1 foot, I would really need to see the true impact of that 1 foot setback. Closer sight. I walked the site, I walked the road. I'm still having some difficulties with overall mass and being so close to Elm Street. I don't think 1 foot's just going to do it.
Yeah, I don't remember a discussion about the setback. It was more about the simplification last time, I thought.
It was both. I believe it was both. Brian, comments?
I applaud you for cleaning up the house. I think it looks much, much better. It's much more simple. I just have a question for you. On your plan, on the first floor, you're showing 3 windows on the stair going down, and on your elevation, the side windows aren't there. And I was just curious as to which one.
On the first floor, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, the side windows we're going to take out. It gets too complicated because one would have to be higher, one would have to be lower, so.
Okay.
Christine, comments?
I'm not comfortable with the streetscape, and I feel like the massing of the house is still too much.
Jeff?
Similar concerns, and I'd be curious to see the, I noticed on the table, you have the front elevation and how the existing house would fit into that. Will the, in other words, seeing how that differs from the existing structure.
The new structure compared to the old?
Yeah, in terms of that elevation.
Well, it's completely different.
No, I know it's different,
Yeah.
just in terms of the scaling.
Oh, I see.
It's
Okay.
just security.
Right.
But in short, I share the same concerns that my fellow board members do as well.
Any public comment while we're digesting the application? Please step forward.
My name is Michael Miglietti. I live at 139 Elm Street. I am on the south neighbor. I still feel that moving the house up 20 feet is, I'm greatly impacted, probably most out of all the neighbors. My house is 25 foot away from their house, so we have a 25-foot gap between the houses. I have 2 front decks on my house, and the railing faces east and north. They're building a house to the north of me, so all I'm going to see now is house, parking cars in front, because nobody's brought that up. I mean, they're parking the cars in front of the house now. And I just feel that to me, it is something I don't want to be looking at. I've been living there since 1982, and I feel that this is a drastic change. I submitted a letter to the board. I don't know if the board got my letter, of my feelings of the whole idea, of changing Elm Street that way and setting precedents to moving a house up. The design of the house, I haven't seen the new design. I'm open to different designs, that's fine, but not pushing that house up. I've been there 32 years or 35 years, and I've not complained to any of my neighbors of any type of renovations ever gone. This is the first time I've been in front of the board. The only time I was in front of the board was for my own home, which they would not let me knock down my garage. And they told me, lift it and move it. You can't knock it down. It's built in 1930. I said, well, So I've had problems with the board where they wouldn't let me knock down my building. I moved it, but I couldn't knock it down. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any further public comment? Please step forward.
Hello, Kevin Finnegan, 175 Elm Street. I just want to make sure, I haven't had a chance to see the plans, that there is not a second-story deck or a second-floor deck.
There is not a second
Back of
story
that
on the
house.
new rendering.
Okay, thank you. That was my concern.
Any more public comment? Board members, anything further? Yeah, please step forward.
Leah Rosalia, 145 Elm. Again, we really appreciated your comments. We really tried to simplify the house, which, thank you, Mr. Brady, for pointing that out. We appreciate that. We might not be longtime residents of this village, but it doesn't mean that we're not interested in it, and I just wanted to point that out. I'm not going to go into Mr. Studenroth's report. You know, we can demolish the house. There have been many, many additions to this house, which is the reason why we are demolishing it. The current and the proposed gross floor area will not change. We're not making the square footage bigger of this house. The overall house lot coverage of the current and proposed also does not increase. The width of the current home is 43 feet 10 inches. The new house will be decreased, not by much, but still, again, a decrease. I walk my daughter back and forth every day to school. I love Elm Street. I look at all the houses, we ride our bikes. You know, it's not that we're oblivious to the look and feel of it. Things that I like about Elm Street are that the houses do not all line up in one row. There are many varieties with respects to the style, colors, windows, height, width, depth. And that's what makes it so interesting. It doesn't make it look out of sync or spectacle if one house is forward or back. There is a lot of that within Elm Street. Again, I think the letter mentioned that you would be setting a precedent by allowing us to move up the house. That's not the case. There are many houses on Elm Street.
What letter? I'm sorry, you said the
Our
letter?
neighbor, Mr., I'm sorry, I can't pronounce
Okay,
the last
all
name.
right, so someone wrote a letter, okay.
Yes, it's in your file.
Okay.
That it would be setting a precedent by allowing us to move the house up. We don't feel that that's accurate. The building department doesn't feel that that's accurate. Again, parking in the front, setting a precedent, that's within the code. We aren't going for any variances. We're building within the code. We're allowed to move the house up actually to 25 feet. We're not doing that. That was another thing, that all the village codes are being met for the house setbacks, parking areas. I drove up and down Elm Street today just because I really wanted to get another feel for what some of the issues were. I counted almost 15 or 20 houses that are close to the street, 30 feet or less, up and down Elm Street. Not just to the north of us, but also to the south. I'd like the board to take that into consideration. There are many houses that have part or all parking in the front of the house on Elm Street. So again, our house is not going to set a precedent by moving it up or having parking in the front. This is all within the guidelines and the code of the town. Again, I mentioned before, we installed trees from the 25-foot mark back, evergreens, you know, in consideration for our own privacy, our neighbors' privacy. We also put privet from the 25 mark up to Elm Street. On our survey, we're proposing that privet also be installed across the front line of the property and to the right of us, I'm sorry, to the north line of the property. We're doing that for our own privacy and also because many other houses on Elm Street have done the same. Many that have houses that are up more forward. So again, these are all things that we're trying to take into consideration for the benefit of ourselves, our own privacy, but also for our neighbors.
Thank you. Any more public comment?
You know, I feel like putting privet up, which is, you know, a nice idea, but privet doesn't live forever. Houses are there forever, as you mentioned. And privet only grows so high. I mean, houses are 2.5 stories high. Privet, you know, if you were to go up that high with a privet or a arborvitae, it's not going to be there forever. They might not be there forever. I don't know what the next person's going to do. Whether he's going to come in and say, oh, you know, take these privets down now, and that house is going to be sitting right in front of me. Right now, I'm going to be looking at that house. Not just the height of a fence or the height of a privet, it's going to be a wall of a house next to me. 25 foot away, I'm the only one that's really that close at a house. If I was a neighbor on the other side, I wouldn't really be here. But I am the one that's really impacted the greatest on that block.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Any more comment? Oh,
It's just one very quick thing. I totally understand what he's saying. I'm not discounting that. All of his entertainment area is on the south side of his property. Between our house and his house is a driveway. Yes, there are some decks, I believe, that his tenants, you know, use, which is fine, but all of his patios, pool, way to the rear, and also on the north, on the south side of his property, not impacting. Our house moving up does not impact any entertainment spaces.
Any more comments?
Yeah. I just want to.
Your name for the record.
Jim Branca. I live on Elm Street. I had a notice to come here as well. I'm supporting Mike as well. She mentioned that there's a lot of houses on Elm Street that are closer. I believe they're houses like Barbara Wilson's, much smaller homes. So now they're taking this big house and moving it close to the street. And I think that's just going to look out of proportionate with the entire north side of Elm Street. I mean, no, west side of Elm Street? West side of Elm Street. I mean, we've walked it, we've talked about it, and it's just, it has to do with the size. The other ones that are closer are smaller homes, so they look okay being closer.
Thank you. Thank you. Board members, not that we are site planners, but we do have the responsibility of visual and streetscape as well as impact. There were some concerns about the house moving forward and its impact. And not necessarily we're asking the house be pushed back, but the impact to the street is obviously relevant. Brian, do you have any comments about the house, its current state, and the impact to the streetscape?
I think it is going to impact the street, but I don't think it's as negative as everyone's trying to make it out to be. You know, I agree with Leah in that the street has houses that are forward, backward, in the middle, all different shapes and sizes. I mean, the house 2 door down is a ranch that's all the way set back on the lot. You know, there's just a variety of all kinds of things. To me, making the architecture work is the prime goal for this house, because it is, you know, it is a challenge to get a backyard in there and things like that for the family, and I can appreciate that. So I'm not thinking it's as negative. I think the design of the house with the tower and a porch and things like that is a graceful way to approach the street, and I don't see the issue.
Christine?
I have reservations about the placing and the design of the house.
Jeff?
Similar to Christina, I do share concerns about the placement of the house, given its design. And you had mentioned in your discussion certain rights that you have by dint of the zoning laws. While you have rights, you also have options. There's a pool in a backyard. I would ask, or perhaps you want to think about those options in the context of the community and your neighbors. To the extent you're willing to, whether it be shrink the size of the pool, rotate the pool, that would allow you to set the house further back. You can choose not to, but the board has expressed its concern, and your neighbors have expressed a concern. And so, again, the zoning code is what it is, but this board is charged with, to the extent it can, respecting and maintaining the harmony in the community. And several members on the board have concerns about this design placed where it is on this lot. And we're asking that you perhaps think of your options perhaps a bit more than your rights.
You don't have the votes, unfortunately, this evening.
I need some clarification, though. Can I?
You have to speak in the microphone,
please. Sorry. Okay, because I understand what you're saying. We have a 50-foot front yard right now and a 23 by 43 backyard. We have a young child.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking the board to take that into consideration. We are not expecting her or permitting her to play in a huge front yard and have no backyard. It's a major concern for us as a family. I understand someone could be there 15 years later, but we would like to have a yard for our daughter to play in. We have very, very strict setbacks, as you can see. We already have a 16-foot pool proposed. It was recommended maybe we put a lap pool in. That's just not feasible for a family with a young child. Again, we'll look at it, but my concern is that we are very limited within our property here, as I've mentioned before. And I think we felt from the last meeting that if we made the house appealing and not so busy and not so, there were a lot of expressions used for the house. If we really did that moving the house up wouldn't be such an issue because it would be a clean, attractive house. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give the neighborhood and the community a clean, attractive house, but also within our, shorter, very shorter depth of our property compared to all of the other ones. Trying to get a backyard for our family.
I don't want you to think the board is not sensitive to why. We understand the why, and you know what, this is it's always the issue of this board when we hear applicants come before us and they give us the reasons why they do what they do, most of which are designing from the inside out, and that's the reason why the house looks the way it does, the reason why windows are placed where they're placed, the reason why certain things are done that gives the outer impact. And this is one of those situations where the why gives an impact that may, in fact, based on the overall body consensus of the board, negatively impacts the project. And as sensitive as we want to be with the why, it can't be a deciding factor because at the end of the day, we still have to worry about overall community impact. So it's that balance that we have difficulties with sometimes. We've had applicants come before us and ask for, a 10-foot closed-in driveway gates, which I'm sure that, I'm sure you would love that, whether it's just a panelization and there's no transparency because you want your children to play in the front yard, but that impact of that hurts the community overall, and that's really the purview of this board, to make sure that the impact is within the overall character of the community.
Okay, in relation to that, I did go and request several surveys of different properties on Elm Street that I had mentioned and Mr. Brady had pointed out that have 20-foot differences.
Sure.
I would like to submit them to the record, and I ask the board, if you are doing field visits, to look at those as well, because I believe that this is not something as unusual as it may seem. So I have a couple of those that I would like to put into the board for that.
Very good. Back there. So at this time, we don't have the board's votes. We looked at the application. It's your discretion at this time to which direction you wish to move. The board is having challenges with the current design being pushed forward, the consensus of the board overall. So we just say that we're not trying to design your home. We're not in a position to design your home. We're not in a position to place your home on the lot in an appropriate manner. We're just saying that based on what you're presenting before this board as the applicant, we're having difficulties approving it.
Okay,
So
so I'm sorry, do I understand that if we gave another proposal, if it was 20, 30 feet forward, that would still be distasteful?
20, 30 feet
I'm sorry,
forward?
25 to 30 foot from where the setback is. Is that the issue, or is
I don't
the
think you
issue
can I don't think you can take the placement and design out of context, because I could think of a house on Old Town that's very close, but it's a 3-story Victorian. That's, I don't know, 30 feet wide. Its placement on the property is perfect. So it's a combination of all those things. Now, I also, in my comment about reconfiguring the pool, there's a lot of distance between, I guess you said you're moving it up 20 feet. So you've got 20 feet to play with. And I didn't say it had it 1 foot further back, and I'm not saying anything, okay? And I think what this board is saying is the effort that you made in this past couple of weeks to come back with 1 foot wasn't sufficient given the design. So just take that into consideration. I don't think the board can say it's X number of feet. In fact, it can't say, and it won't say. But what it does say, and what it is saying, is that this design, this place, is disharmonious with, in our view, with the neighborhood, and would have a detrimental effect on the harmony of the neighborhood.
Okay, I think there might have been confusion. I think we felt that if the house was cleaned up and appealing, that the issue of moving it up would have been
The cleanup was good.
would have been taken care of, and I think that's where I am still confused. But we will again go back to the drawing board, but we need to move the house up in order to get a yard.
Understood.
So,
Thank you.
just want to state that.
Motion? I'm sorry? We're about to adjourn, and there seems to be, the applicant's going to go back to do changes to the project. I don't know what more you could add to. I'm sorry?
I just wonder what the position on the board is. I know that these people purchased this house 2 years ago. Clearly, they were a family at that point. They saw what they were purchasing. They were aware of the size of the lot. So did they purchase this house with the intention of coming here?
Irrelevant.
That's irrelevant?
It's irrelevant, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Their purpose, their reasoning, even their why they decide to buy this particular home is irrelevant. And that wouldn't be substantive information for part of the application. We're an aesthetic board. I don't want to get into the psyche on why a person decides.
No, I'm
or
not saying that, but I'm saying if someone wanted a property with room for a pool, which is a big thing, and either it has room for a pool or it doesn't, you don't buy a house that doesn't have room for a pool
Well,
and
this
then
particular
try to
property
come.
does have room for a pool based on current zoning.
Right.
So, yes, there's room for a pool based on current zoning. We are looking at it from impact from the street. So, again, that gets into a conversation about what reason they purchased their home, and did they really think they were able to add a pool to the rear of the back, to the backyard. Bottom line is they can. The question is, if they were to do so and they move the house forward, what is the impact? That's our purview.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion that we adjourn Leah Marie Rosalia on 145 Elm Street to our next meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you. Aye.
Let's left minutes from October 26th. Everyone was present? Any questions, comments, concerns, errors, or omissions?
No,
Motion.
just one thing. I had said in there about changing the color of the fence, but I've since changed my opinion, but I can take care of that the next time.
I'm sorry?
The minutes were accurate, and I.
That's all that matters.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
Make a motion that we approve
Thank
the
you.
minutes for October 26, 2015.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And motion to close this evening's meeting on
I
November.
make a motion that we close this meeting of the Board of Architecture Review and Historic Preservation, November 9th, 2015.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good
Good
night.
night.